Albert Moffat. Who was Dennis Nilsen and what did you do to him?
Well, Dennis Nilsen was probably Britain's biggest serial killer. He killed like 16, he was found guilty of killing 6 young men in the early 80s. And Dennis Nilsen was in the army, he was a chef and he was a policeman. And later on he worked as, in a job centre. So he had access to these people coming in from Glasgow and certain places looking for jobs, and Nilsen would offer them refuge, put them up for the night and then murder them. Not only murder them, necrophiliac. And he's very well known for what he did, putting the heads in pots and dissecting the bodies and all that. A monster, as I said to the jury, an absolute monster. At the age of 21, I was taken to Warren's Corps prison, charged with theft from Harrods, received a 13-month prison sentence, which I thought, okay, I'll just get on with it. And little do I know, next door to me is Dennis Nilsen, who should have been in the lifers unit, because he was a life sentence prisoner. He shouldn't have been in the same wing as myself. So then on one day in exercise, Nilsen tried to attack me with a razor blade, but I took it off him and managed to insert it inside his face and his neck, which related to Nilsen being operated in the hospital for 12 hours, lost 8 pints of blood. I was charged with attempted murder with intent to murder Dennis Nilsen, and was placed in a maximum security unit while awaiting trial, which was horrendous. And later on, having to wait on the trial, being placed in another secure unit, which I should never have been in, with very vicious prison officers, and later to go on trial in Knightsbridge Crown Court by the Judge Friend by name but not by nature, his nickname was. And he was the same judge who sentenced me to the 13 months for the theft of the diamonds. So the trial went ahead. I pled self-defence. Nilsen came and gave evidence but refused to identify me, which didn't really matter because they'd already identified me in a picture and wrote a statement saying it was me. And I'd pled self-defence anyway. So after a long trial with many witnesses coming in, I was acquitted by a jury of self-defence. And I said afterwards, the recommendation of 25 years sentence, should be a whole life term. He should never be released. The man was a monster. Later on, the Home Secretary increased his tariff to a whole life sentence. And I said I had no remorse about it. I'd do it again. I would have done it again if cases. And I'm sorry he didn't get 189 stitches, because when he attacked me, he probably thought I was just going to stand there and let him chop me to pieces. But obviously I didn't. In 6 feet 11. But I managed to get a hold of him and save my life. I was fighting for my life, which the prosecution was saying, do you believe this? It's the only way you can be found not guilty of self-defence. You have to be shown to be acting in self-defence. And the jury went out for 3 hours, couldn't make a decision, and then came back in. And the judge instructed them they would accept a majority decision. And his final words to the jury was, who do you believe? Nilsen the mass killer or Moffat the thief? 20 minutes later the jury came in. And it was quite funny actually. It wasn't funny at the time. The chairman stood up and they asked him, how do you find the defendant? And he went, he was a big Irish guy with a big red face, And he went, oh, guilty. And I went, what? And he went, oh no, not guilty. So that was it. I was acquitted of it. Rightly so,
Right, great. Now, tell me about the time that you made legal history.
Well, that's when I was charged along with Thomas Wisby and James Hussey, who both great train robbers. I was going out with the daughter, Malin Wisby, who wrote a book, Gangsters Mall. There's a picture of me in the book, and the stories in the book. I was going out with Malin, and I was in Marbella, in Spain, living quite well. I'd already been with Malin to Switzerland and all around the world with her. And there was cocaine found in the house, kilos of cocaine. So Malin was pregnant at the time with my child. So I'm in Spain, and the father told me he'd escaped the police's clutches, so to speak, and he was on the run. But they'd got Jimmy Hussey in the park with a kilo of cocaine. So I came back from Spain and gave myself up, said to the police, because I knew where the cocaine was. And I said that was mine.
Mm-hmm.
So I was charged with conspiracy with the cocaine. And after like 18 months in custody, I managed to get Sir Nicholas Fairbairn, Attorney General of Scotland, Scotland's most proficient QC, to come down and represent me, which made legal history because a Scottish QC has never been allowed in an English court. And he had to go to the Woolpack, which was Lord McCluskey at the time of Glasferrin, and he agreed that he could come down and represent me. He did one day bar tests, whatever, and so he came to visit me and told me he was going to represent me at the court. And so what happened was we pled guilty and was sentenced. Jimmy Hussey pled guilty, was sentenced. The two women were acquitted, and I was acquitted of the cocaine charge. But later on, I was charged with perjury, which I received an 18-month sentence for. That 18-month sentence was time served because I'd spent 18 months on remand.
Mm-hmm.
And Sir Nicholas Fairbairn, I used to go and see him in his palace in Scotland. I was quite friendly with him after that. And he said to the judge, "This is a tale of two cities, where a man's love for a woman can put himself in jeopardy," which the judge agreed on. So that was that one.
And what was your greatest exploit in crime?
Well, the most savage exploit in crime was in Italy. I went to Italy for the Champions League, Barcelona playing Manchester United.
Mm-hmm.
Biggest game in the world. It was held at the Stadium de Rome. I was staying in the Hilton International Hotel in an executive suite. And my plan was to rob Bulgari the jewellers, not with guns or anything like that. I had a friend of mine who made a device. When you press the buzzer to get into a jeweller's, the jewellers also have a look to see who's getting in and let you in. So my plan was that this device could let me out. It picked up the frequency of the alarm. So I was in the jewellers, I'm looking at diamond rings. I sent the gentleman in to the window to get something else, and I walked out the door. I let myself out, click, and I was gone.
Mm-hmm.
Later to be arrested in Milan. I was sitting in Monte Napoleone, smoking my Monte Cristo cigar,
Mm-hmm.
waiting to do another jewellers. And next thing I know, I'm surrounded by, they're called the Squadra Mobile. These policemen don't wear helmets or anything like that. They all carry guns and they drive high-speed motorbikes. And I'm surrounded by them, beaten across the arm with an iron bar that they use, and guns put in my face. All my teeth smashed out with guns saying, "No movete, pezzo di merda, o spari in the testa," which basically means don't move, piece of shit, or we'll shoot you. Taken to the hospital and operated on the hospital, then taken to the police station. Then, having them saying to me, "We've got photographs of you with Italian criminals.
Mm-hmm.
We've been looking all over Italy for you. We haven't been able to find you, and we believe you've got links in Italy. Association de Mafia, which is a charge that carries a 20-year sentence." Obviously, I thank God that my advocate managed to get that tossed out. But I pled guilty to the crimes and was given a 5-year sentence, but in a maximum security prison, a mafia prison, and San Vittoria in Milan. And to be told that I'd do the whole 5 years, which is a 10-year sentence for stealing some diamonds. They didn't get anything back. It was absolutely atrocious. And the man from the English consulate came to see me, and I was trying to get back to England, because if I got back to England, then my sentence would only be 2.5. But he says the Italians are not letting you go, the Ministry of Justice in Italy is not letting you go, so you'll serve the whole 5 years and could have expulsione from Italy as well, for a life sentence, for life, But during my time in prison, I studied psychology and philosophy, and I got a degree in it from Milan University. And I fought against the appeal because I like to return to Italy. And eventually the Supreme Court in Rome cancelled the expulsione and reduced it from life to 6 years. So I can now go back to Italy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an experience I'll never forget.
What was prison in Italy like?
Well, there's nothing like England. There's a 6-man cell, so you had your own kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and these guys were like they're all from Napoli, they're all doing like 25 years each, and Neapolitan Mafia did store security guard with €11 million in it. So, you know, I mean, good for us, this was the real deal. You know, so we had our own food coming in every day, because these people could get visits every day. So we had our own mangiare, as we say, you know, steaks, smoked salmon, the best of Italian food coming in every day in plastic bags. And we had our own cooking facilities, so we could cook there, and we had a table with the serviettes and the wine.
Very civilized.
So, well, it's mafia.
The trouble is, I'm surprised they let you have that, because that meant you had knives, you had glass, you had potential weapons there.
Well, the guards had guns.
Okay, right.
In certain parts of the prison, you know, and when you went on exercises, I found it quite hilarious. You know, you had that, you know, it's all bars and wires and all that sort of thing, so there's no helicopters can come in. You know, and when our section used to go on, the Italians would come out and they put balaclavas on.
Yeah.
Certain parts of the roof, and they had rifles and machine guns guarding the 50 or 60 people. And the Italian jets used to fly by when we were on exercise to make sure there's no one, because you got to remember some of these guys are the most vicious mafia members in Italy, so they'll do anything to escape.
Right.
So that was a period of time, and eventually I was released from there, you know, and only to be taken back to England. The maximum security airport, escort to the airport, they put me on a plane, and I thought I was getting out. And as I arrived in England, the police were waiting for me for Damien Hirst, when I stole a diamond from Damien Hirst, the diamond dealer, the painter. He had an exhibition in Bond Street, but I'd stolen one of his diamonds before I went to Italy. So they had me for that. So I went on trial for that.
Could you demonstrate your technique whereby you liberated this diamond?
There's 2 coins here.
Right.
Heads.
We'll look at the coins quite carefully.
Right. I'll do it quite quickly. So, sleight of hand.
Now we're looking at which tails here in both cases?
Both heads.
Both heads, yeah.
There's 2 heads there.
There are, yeah.
Heads.
Yes.
Heads. Call.
Tails. You see, there's nothing under your right hand.
That's it.
Exactly. I didn't.
Not only that, because you're looking at diamonds, don't forget, George.
Yeah.
You know. And basically what I would do, apart from the deception thing, it's a lot of psychology involved in this. I'm obviously very well dressed when I was in these diamond dealers. So these diamond merchants thinking, oh, he's buying a diamond ring at £500,000. So straight away they're thinking commission. Because a diamond ring at £500,000, George, when it's broken up, you're lucky if you walk away with £75,000. Who's stealing from who? Because the diamond merchants charge so much money, Cartiers and all these diamond dealers. As soon as you walk out the door, you know you've lost a tenth of the value, with 30%, 40% of the value of what the stone's worth. So that was how I would do that. So there's an illusion. I'm looking at all these diamonds sort of thing, and they're thinking I'm buying one. And I pick out one, so I'm going to buy this one. And I put it to the side. I say, put the rest away. Keep this one, I'll be back in half an hour. We've had a banker's draft to pay for it. I'll be back the next day. So he's thinking he sold a diamond ring at £50,000, £100,000. And he hasn't looked at his stock. When he look at his stock later on, there'll be a diamond missing. And it'll be me.
And they might not look at it for days.
For days. And how many people go into the diamond merchants afterwards and look at diamond rings? So who's stealing from who? I may have stolen from diamond dealers and high value shops and all that, but at the end of the day, you know, who's robbing who?
What was your motivation to become a gentleman thief?
My motivation was because I always wanted to be well dressed, have nice items in life and all that sort of thing. I mean, I don't suggest that anyone should ever do it. I don't want to see anyone in prison. I don't clarify being in prison. It's a horrible way to be, and if I had my life over again, I would never do it again. You know, it was just things that I did. And you asked me, you know, the biggest claim to fame. Oh, there's many, because I'm in books. One book by Marlon Wisby, the daughter of the great train robber, called Gangsters Mall. There's a photograph of me. Mad Frankie Fraser wrote a book, and I'm mentioned in that book. And on YouTube, the notorious Ian Blink MacDonald, who was sentenced for trying to steal £6 million from a bank in Bournemouth. He speaks about me in his book,
Right.
and he also speaks about me on his YouTube channel. But I suppose the biggest one out of the lot of them was when I was charged with Vacher, the diamond dealers across in Fortons and Masons, in Piccadilly, taking a diamond ring at £75,000 was one. And then later on, stealing a Rembrandt etching from Bonhams, probably the most exclusive auctioneers in the world, apart from Kirsty.
How did you manage that?
Well, it was by invitation only to look at the pieces they were showing, because they were shown, like, as you can imagine, a very high value pieces of art from all around the world. From not only Rembrandt, they had some Degas, and they had some Toulouse-Lautrec, but just the etchings, just to explain what an etching is. When someone like Rembrandt does a picture, you don't just paint the picture instantly, you do an etching of it.
It was a study towards the final work.
Study towards the final work. You do a drawing of it, so that's very, very valuable, because it's the actual drawing of the picture itself. So you can imagine Bonhams, if you can imagine it. You got to get an invitation to get in there, and I got it from Bond Street. I was in looking at an art dealer and managed to take one of his pieces of paper. So I had that, and it got me the entrance in, and I had the monocle on, the glasses and all that sort of thing. You know, the spyglass, and it's all ropes around about it. As you can imagine, security guards everywhere. And the gentleman would come across and he had on the white gloves and show you an etching, one at a time. You know, but I got to look at one etching, the Rembrandt etching, then I asked to see another one, and I had the magazine with me, the Christie's magazine, the Bonhams magazine. And so I slipped into the magazine very quickly and got another one, and walked out with it. Later on, I was on Crime Watch. Albert Moffat, diamond thief, was wanted for stealing diamonds and Rembrandts and several other things. So it was on national television, 2018, Interpol all around Europe. So eventually I got caught. And the police officers were like, you know, adamant, that's you stole these items, you know. And obviously no bail, flight risk. The judge was like, no, the prosecution was like, Mr. Moffat's got connections all around the world. If he was given bail, he'd flee the country, which I've never done. And so I was incarcerated. And preliminary trials, the prosecution, for the first time ever in my life, I thought, this is it. They're getting me this time. You know, saying to the judge, we want to bring up Mr. Moffat's antecedents, previous convictions. Now, I just served a 5-year sentence initially. What chance would I have of a jury? The jury being told that this guy stole diamonds all around the world. He'd been arrested in France, Germany, Switzerland, Belgium, Holland, and Scotland. You know, in England for stealing high-value goods. You know, my QC was like that to the judge. Your Honour, he says, this is highly unusual. You know, this is going to be allowed. You're going to allow this. He said, because we're from the same temple. You know, the same as the judges are, and prosecutors and members of the legal profession are. And he was like, yes, I'm going to allow it. He went, well, we've tried murderers and sex offenders and killers together, horrendous crimes, and they've never had their previous convictions been read out to a jury. Why Moffat? The judge, well, I'm going to allow it. But what happened, you get a 6-month period, and you get, you know, I've done the 6 months time limit, and they applied for a longer term, which my QCs fought against. So on the day of the trial, which meant to go ahead, it didn't go ahead. The next day, the prison officers came in with a letter from the judge. Mr. Moffat is to be released from custody immediately. So the case was dismissed against me, but I spent 6 months in custody. You know, it was quite horrendous. You know, so that was that.
What's the worst thing about prison?
Being locked up. You know, there's nothing worse in the world than having your liberty taken away. We can all be tough guys, and, you know, being bravado and all that. You're better off being a gentleman and just getting on with it. You know, and just to have your liberty taken away where you can't walk 5 feet, read a book, get access to anything is absolutely horrendous. And
tell me about what was going on in Berlin whilst you were there.
Oh, that was a long time ago. You know, horrendous. I was in Berlin, charged with jewellers in Glasgow, mapping my gowns in a gay arcade. no bail, sitting in Ballini, and my mother had just passed away, you know, and I'd taken to my mother's funeral along with my two brothers who were serving 18 years each at the time, taken down from Peterhead Prison, horrendous, armed guards and police officers and all that sort of thing. It was on my father's funeral. I never got to my mother's funeral. They wouldn't allow me to my mother's funeral, which is horrendous.
It certainly is, yes.
That was the case in England. Going back to the Glasgow one. So later on, to be found guilty of the jailers, sentenced. In Ballini prison, B-Wing Ballini, 1987, people were being assaulted and beaten up by prison officers by the Governor Andrew Gallagher, and a riot took place, the longest siege in British history, which I was involved in. But I was only involved in the protest on the roof. I was never, no one ever seen me assaulting a prison officer flinging bricks, there was, it went on for 5 days, George, and the press was all there, and helicopters, Margaret Thatcher saying, sending the SAS to Ballini. And the most frightening part about it, you're sitting there, and you've got people there who are serving life sentences. You could quite easily kill those prison officers because they've got them hostage. There's nowhere for them to go. And thank God someone had some control to say, look, don't kill them. So eventually there were 12 of us remaining, and the last thing we did before we were brought down, we did all negotiations. The priest did the negotiations. The negotiations were that we were to be access to a family for the first time, open visits, because it was all closed visits. And secondly, we were going to be examined by doctors, cameras, police officers to show that no marks on us, so there can be no rehabilitation to us, no more beatings while we're being held waiting on trial. When you're charged with taking 3 prison officers hostage, mutiny and rioting, it's a 20-year sentence I was facing. And I got on with Andrew Gallagher, Slasher Gallagher, and we were held in a place called the Wendy House, which was a special unit, secure. 10 prison officers with us all the time, every time we went on exercise. 10 prisoners officers in the back of a van, handcuffed. And one day I wasn't happy with the facilities, so they put me in this, what they call the most secure unit in Ballini. It was a cage within a cage. It was like a metal, like this room here, but completely covered in tin. And you had one cell here, one gate here that I had access to the toilet, and they had to come in the other gate. And I was held there for months and months and months. I ended up going on hunger strike, which was in the national press, because of the conditions, and there was more riots took place protesting about the conditions I was being held in. And my family were protesting about, he's on hunger strike, he's dying. And I was eventually taken from there to the prison hospital. And from the prison hospital, same sort of negotiations were going on. And eventually what happened, the other prisoners were all pled guilty to charges, and the charges against me was dropped. So I was freed from that, which was absolutely horrendous.
So which was the worst prison you were ever held in?
Oh, Ballini.
I see.
For brutality, for beatings.
Was there anything about prison made it bearable? Any moments of happiness?
You make your own life, don't you? They may have your mind, they may have your body, George, but they haven't got your mind. I did a lot of reading, as I did in Italy, like psychology and philosophy and things like that to pass the time. You're incarcerated, so you've got to make the best of it.
Was prison in Italy more bearable?
More bearable. The sentence wasn't bearable. 10 years. 5 years, but to do the whole 5, it was more bearable because you had access to food. And your own food. We had our own food and ample cigarettes and all that sort of thing. That was more bearable, and you could do a lot of study. It took me 1.5 years at war with the establishment before I was allowed a private tutor. I paid for my own tutors.
Wow.
From Milan University.
And the other thing is, open prison. How easy is open prison?
Well, I was only in open prison once, Ford open prison, in the early 90s. Very, very well. You're not locked up 23 hours a day. The way you are in English prisons now, and you had access to good jobs, and you could get out. And there was lots of open air, and open. A lot of people smuggling in alcohol, You know, I used to send people over the fence to go and get me some alcohol, a bottle of whiskey and brandy and all that. So we had all that going on, you know, and plenty of food. And you get out. I used to get out once a month for a couple of days. The governor used to let me out back to my home. But when I said, when I never got to my mother's funeral, I was arrested, and again in London, by the police officers, New Scotland Yard, for something I didn't commit. You know, and I was completely innocent. You know, attempted theft. You know, attempted theft is it's like suspicion. You know, they don't have to have any evidence. You know, someone steals a diamond ring, they take the shoe, so you're in the frame. So I was charged with, again, stealing diamonds. And during that time, I'm in Wandsworth prison on remand. And my mother passed away, horrendously. So we went up for bail, an emergency bail hearing. And the judge was like, no, I'm not letting him go out on bail. You know, even though the Scottish authorities were like, we want him out. It was actually raised in the Scottish Parliament at a time where MP stood up and went, free him. But I never got there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not to get to your mother's funeral, and later on, receive a small sentence because the evidence against me was so biased against me, and the judge agreed on that, so he gave me a small sentence. I never got to my mother's funeral, which is very devastating, you know, to not to be able to get access. And, you know, even the Scottish authorities were like, look, get him to the airport. If you allow him to the airport, the governor of the prison by guards, we'll take him from there to Ballina, but he'll get to his mother's funeral. I don't know whether it was a Nielsen thing or whatever, but the English prison authorities always had it against me. So the governor refused it. He went, I haven't got this prison officers to take you to the airport. What a load of fucking bollocks. Excuse my language.
Were there ever any decent prison officers?
Well, it's just like anything else in life, George. You get bad prison officers, good prison officers, bad police officers. You know, I used to think to myself, okay, they're doing a job. Some of them are savage, George, you know, psychopaths. Because they don't realise they're as much a prison as you are. When they realise that, I used to say to the ones that wanted to beat me up and all that, you know, nasty ones, I used to go, how long will you do? I'll be getting out of here when you're here forever. And that would drive them nuts. You know, psychologically. You know, and I used to say to them every time I saw them, when they come in like, Albert Moffat, we're taking you to the maximum security building. I go, that's not a problem, but how long will you do? That sort of thing. So that, you know, there's good and bad prison officers and police officers.
So, what would you say to...
Mostly came across bad ones.
Right. What would you say to any young person who's listening to this and thinks, wow, that's quite impressive, I'd like to do what he's done?
If I had my life to live over again, sounds like a song. You know that song, if I had my life to live over, I would never do anything again. I'm quite an intelligent man. I'd make sure that never happened to me. You know, but then again, I grew up on the south side of Glasgow where crime was quite... My brothers were armed robbers, George. You know, my brothers were 18 years each. Obviously, they're still fighting the case against it. You know, the evidence against it was planted. It was like Fairbairn was the QC. I mean, my brother George Thomas was given 18 years, and my brother James 18 years in the early 80s without a shot being fired in security van. Okay, they did, if it was them, they did wrong, but no one got hurt. And to be given 18 years is a life sentence. You know, my brothers went to appeal, and my brother Thomas said, I will do every day of the 18-year sentence because I'm completely innocent. Take the 4-year sentence off of me and take it off of his brother, our brother James, and get his sentence from 18 to 10. But the judges refused that. And and later the 14-year sentences, the 18 was reduced to 14. And I mean, my brother Thomas did every day of his sentence, every day. Didn't see an open prison, you know, because he wouldn't admit his guilt in the crime. So these things happen in life. But I would always say to people, you know, if you are, you know, crime, does it pay? You might have money, or it can be taken away from you by the authorities, which has happened to me on several occasions. Crime doesn't pay, you know.
Well, thank you, Albert. I think that's a worthy lesson we've
I'll
learned.
just introduce my good friend here.
Okay. Do you want to be introduced? Yes, there you are. Okay. Great. Thank you so much, Albert.
Thank you, George.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.